loud and record on this. Okay.
Ready? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Inland and Wetlands Watercourse Commission on November 9th. Is anybody here who has anything to say? Citizens that's not on the agenda? We can answer your questions, or try to anyways. If not, gentlemen, read the minutes. Any additions, deletions, corrections? Steve, anything?
He's muting until.
Okay. If not, accept.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of October.
Can I have a second? Seconds. Oh, if you read them though, you can read it. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, next, public hearing. Application 21-09W, proposal by Preserve SM LLC to construct a 76-unit residential development with associated improvements within regulated wetland areas on Lot 1, Block 10, West Lane. I need a motion to open the public hearing.
Motion to open public hearing, application 21-W.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Who's up?
Good evening. Tim Sullivan on behalf of the applicant, the Preserve SM LLC. We're here tonight on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Bove, Mark Bove, he's the engineer. Jen Benno is on virtually, as well as Scott Stevens, and George Logan is here in person as well.
We can't see you.
There you go.
Is that better like that?
Maybe. You want us to see your backside or your front side?
Well, I'm gonna address the commission too. They want to see my backside or my front.
Either side is nice, so don't worry.
Sorry.
That's it.
They can hear you.
And Joe Klepacki is here as well virtually. At this point, the commission has been looking at this proposal for almost a year. We filed it in December of last year. Because of the pandemic, we ran out of extensions. It was actually withdrawn in July. It's the second application. It's changed quite a bit through the months. Not much since we filed the application in the second application in August. It was continued. We went through a very exhaustive program last time, identifying the entire project and really identifying changes from the last time the commission looked at it. The board was going to add some items to his prints, which he's done. I want him to review that. A lot of it is wetlands mediation and some rare species. Knows how we're handling these things. He worked in conjunction with the development of those notes. The public hearing was also left open to allow the commission to digest the application and the proposal presentation. We also, Mr. Logan's continued to work on his response to the NDDB letter, and we submitted a preliminary overview of that last time. I believe he's here to speak to that again tonight. We won't make that available. We would possibly like to get a vote tonight. Seems fit. But in any event, we would make that at least a condition. This is information that will be submitted in support of our stormwater management. But this time I'll turn it over to Bart to go over some of the changes on the plans. No real engineering changes, but the notes and things.
Good evening, Mark Bove from H. Cole & Son, representing the applicant. It's nice to be back in the old room. It took a year and a half to do it, but anyway, what I did is I basically updated the plan. Most of the items I provided to staff were typographical, mostly notes missing. I think I included with our form a tabulated list of the changes. There were two really sheets that were changed. The note sheet was the second sheet from the set, and the sheet E5, which is the detail of the invasive species. So I just want to briefly go through what I did on the plans. George can talk about his notes and how he came upon notes, and I've already put them on the plan. I think you've got a copy of both his original notes and the revised plan, so you can make sure that put the proper notes on the plan. And then I'll go through the phasing plan with one of the commissioners at the last meeting talked about phasing. I talked to Jim about it, and I talked to my clients, and we'll go over that in a second. But sheet 5, or the note sheet, as I should say, is the plan that has basically all the upfront notes. It's fairly, it was actually the second seat of the set, so it's not something that's going to get buried or seen in the back. In that note, I've included George's notes for the invasive plant removal and implementation notes, which are this long section. He's got some planting materials for the barberry removal, to supplement the removal. And I also have put on these plans the animal protection measures for amphibians. They were on for the last time, but we've got to move them around. And, those are basically from the NDVD letter from the DEP. They had recommendations, and we included those within the report. If you've got a copy of that letter, we're just copying Jen's original report. And then we've also added, we've kind of cleaned up the site plan notes and put some other information on this plan. But this is the plan that basically has the information that George will go over. The other plan that I've prepared is the invasive species removal plan, which shows these 5 primary areas of barberry that were located along the outside. Our biologist Sigrid also did some location back in here, and she found the area of barberry and some bittersweet that was found in this area. So these are some other potential areas that we can do our removal. These are the invasive species basically growing on the fringes or near the center of the development area, which are the primary cost, or development area, if you remember that plan that we had. This one. The regrowth of this field area is in theory the primary area for a lot of the invasive seeds that have germinated and kind of taken over some of these areas, and also a source of seeds for the upper Ragged Mountain area. So by developing this area here and working on those fringe areas, we feel we can do a great deal of good by removing the invasive species, eliminating the source of seeds, and the potential for these invasive species to expand and grow within the area. So I'm going to let George talk about his notes and how he came up with his plan, and I will talk about the phasing.
Well, good evening, George Logan for the Record Agreement for Local Services. Very, very simply, the last time I passed around a sheet of paper that had some preliminary notes of what we're doing as far as the division is concerned. So those have been expanded. We'll go back. Markers done. In reality, the same notes that are provided in this form. So there's 2 areas that we've identified. It's the back side of this. And we did talk about those the last time when we had another. The first one, as you recall, what we had said to you is that due to the past agricultural activities, remember, if you look somewhere at the old aerial photographs, a lot of this was actually pasture. You see that, look at aerial photographs here. So that's the reason why we have a barberry is predominantly anywhere in Connecticut where forest was open as far back as the 50s. That's basically what had happened. So we have areas of barberry that are below the wetland buffer. And they're also slightly within the poorly drained soils, not the very poorly drained soils. Go over it pretty deep. So the idea here was to carefully, using the protocols that are promulgated by the Connecticut City Wetland Conservancy has something similar, is to go in there and remove the barberry. The barberry is removed mechanically, as I've explained before. It's very simple. Use either a weed wrench, or the smaller ones, or just cut them in the base. And you remove the entire mass. Obviously, you have to make sure that you remove it properly, not at another area, because there are obviously areas that the back. So, protocol mentions that there's not just a 1 year thing, but there's a follow-up. Because usually what happens, about 90% of the barberry removed mechanically with barberry. There's been some studies that have been done by Bill Moorhead did one in Farmington. Bill Moorhead now is an independent consultant. He's not working for surveys. Relief bottoms, the colleges. And so what we've noticed is that 90% of the barberry goes away and have to come back and just look for a few of the resprouts because they don't readily resprout. Some of that is going to happen in the outland. Again, carefully without disturbing the wetland soils. And a bunch of it is going to happen in the outland. We identify those areas. And these are altogether the areas of they're larger here, but we've said in our plan that we're looking somewhere along 3/4 of an acre. Might be a little more on the side. And of course, we have another one over here that Sidney has identified close to the esker. And we talked about this little geological formation, which is our past glaciation and meltwater with this interesting sand deposit. So we're kind of dealing a little bit with the Berlin Land Trust, trying to be nice to them too, because they're going to receive this land. So basics as far as barley, and if there's some multiflorals, which I believe there is here, obviously that's what we're thinking of. It's a lot less here, but also that we'll be thinking of, so not just the barberry is the main color. And then what we said in our plan is that when we get there the second year, after it's been a full year of regrowth, and take out the little barberry that's sprouted, just yanking out of the ground. We will identify if there are any areas don't seem to be coming up nicely. Seed sources there, problems that are there. And those areas we want to be planting shrubs and also doing some seeding depending on whether or not we have areas that are we have exposed soil, obviously those will be required for seeding. So in that table that I provided, which is also on the plan, what you see is a lot of to be determined. I didn't give you numbers. I could tell you probably it's going to be anywhere from 70 to 100 shrubs, something like that. The seed mix is also one of those that are, the seed mix does not exist at this point. It's completely tailored. So what we usually do is, okay, this is a list of species that we do well in moist areas and slightly wet areas. So we identify what those are. But also obviously ones that are fine in shaded areas, because this is shaded area, for instance. Ladder sedge is a common species that we find, particularly early, because of some of the soils we have. And some others here. What we do is say, okay, based on what's happening in this particular location, this location, I know we create this seed. So what we do is we go to Burns Conservation Seed Mix there. So then we say, we want this, a given percentage. So they actually create this. Just this area, specific. So that's basically what we're doing. As far as the report to the that's in process. We did a little better on it a few weeks ago, and then Sarah was actually coming back from Oregon today. So she's back in the reporting hopefully. So that will be done. But we had a flurry of those reports. Actually, we had 6 reports in those kind of reports we had. We are done. when it's done, we will certainly give it to the commission, even though it's not necessarily something that is typically required to have the full technical report. That's why we gave you the initial report. We have no problem, obviously, giving the entire report, which will be all technical. A lot of attachments, other interesting information. So it would be nice to have it, I guess, in your file. It is a complete picture of what's going on out there as far as the potential for that species.
When do you think that submission will be?
Well, our plans, I believe, in our last bar are pretty much just about ready to go to the DEP. As is. So the only thing that we're waiting for now is for you to finish this report for us, considering ourselves. I expect that will be ready in the next.
So you could furnish that to the commission prior to the next meeting in December.
I could, yes.
Is there anything that the DEP could see in this that they don't agree with, they don't like?
No, typically, so based on experience that I've had with them for quite some time now, we do many of these reports. If we identify species that are listed that are on their list, or sometimes we find things that are not on their list. If we find these species, or if we have a high probability that such a species could exist there, what happens is we include mitigation for it off the bat. So, okay, we're going to assume that these are here, or we've seen them and they are here, and therefore, in this particular situation, I think what Sigurd said in the initial report, what we said in the initial report, is that as far as plants are concerned, there are several that we could just discount right off the bat because that particular habitat does not exist here. It exists up the mountain, or talus slopes are some of the species that are existing. We don't have any talus slopes here. Some of other species, so 3 or 4 of the plant species, the ones that are of moist and wet habitat, well, we didn't see them, but we can discount that they might be. Some fast wetlands, obviously. Walk through every single acre of wetlands that's really good. But again, because of that, we can say, if they do exist there, they're protected. Protected in the most transitional area, because that's being protected too. So then, the only thing that's left is things that we do have habitat for, where we weren't in the right time of the year to find them. For instance, spotted turtle, Jefferson salamander, 2 species that could potentially utilize this vernal pool here, and possibly the gigantic swamp. Very often you find spotted turtles in ditches, high-man ditches of organic swamps. I don't know why, it's just like, it seems that that's, let's say, probably 8 out of 10 times that I've seen spotted turtle in this kind of concentration. So, the protective of the vernal pool, protective of the connectivity of the vernal pool, is other potential habitats for spotted turtle. If Jefferson salamander is here, that will protect of that too. Although I sincerely think, based on my experience with Jefferson salamander, where I've seen it before, especially in trap rock ridges, there's a vernal pool somewhere up here. That's more of a classic vernal pool. As a matter of fact, that's the vernal pool that Mr. Jackson, who's part of your commission, studied for many years as part of his inventory on that recently did. And speaking to him sometime in the past, and he said that yes, there are salamander-looking egg masses which could potentially be Jefferson salamander in most of the fried egg masses. He actually did ecologic studies. So I think that's the classic vernal pool that's out there. Of course, we have those further up in the mountain. That I've seen. Both that were married and developed together. Large 821 acres, I inventoried it, to the vertical there that just so. So, included mitigation for what we either suspect is there, or what's highly probable. So that's the mitigation. First, I talked about taking the protocol from directly from the Connecticut. That's something that, it's a species of special concern, what DEP has done over the years. At first, it was like, go look and find it. Okay, we go look and find it. And if you're at the right time of the day, the right time of the year, high activity areas like in June when they're starting to breed, you can find it. First thing was like, walk this way, walk there, see. So what was done, what DEP has done, realizing that that's the case, that there's a high probability of obviously developers will said this is what you can do during the construction period to take these turtles out of harm's way. And I would say that probably 2 to 3 times a year we're hired to do these kinds of surveys during construction, just before construction, the initial phases of construction, which is basically what it is you try to encircle the area of construction. But actually you can't have a sill fence, because obviously across it. Sill fence is up through the first phase, you go and you look for box hills at a certain time of the day, usually after a rainstorm and the sun's out. And if you find it, we have a scientific collection permit. We have box turtle, wood turtle, and a whole bunch of other things. We can pick up those species and put them on the other side of the fence. Once everything's done, sill fences are out, then the turtles will move to where they feel comfortable to. They don't usually start wandering through developments because they're very sensitive to vibration. So noise. So if they hear vibration on cars and so on and so forth.
So George, from your experience, would the developer call you and advise you of the work he's going to undertake so he can bring you out to that site? I mean, I've heard this story time and time again. Once the approval is in place, how do we ensure that that is going?
Well, that's something that, because the DEP is involved, we're supposed to do.
Doesn't really happen.
It does happen more often in municipal projects.
I've never been advised.
You're correct about that. Say, for instance, we've done 2 projects that have done last November, conservation / the Wetlands Commission. Put it in their record, follow up by their town staff. Okay, pre-construction meeting, bring REMA over. So, pre-construction meeting, we're involved. Once we're involved in the pre-construction meeting, we're there. And then we're required, well, at least in Glastonbury, residential projects, we're required, once we did that, to write a memo, say, yeah, we did that. This is what we did, following something. Actually, two projects in Glastonbury and on turtles. Yes.
So we've had, from a staff standpoint, commissioners, these conditions required to have follow-up reports, bi-weekly inspections. We don't have the staff to do that. The developer doesn't do it. So how do we assure the commission that those kinds of things are done?
Well, if I'm not still alive and kicking and involved, then we had a recent example, right? That's what we're talking about, but I did go out there, but it was a 2.5 year period between, instead of a yearly. So according to your conditions that we might be involved in the construction meeting for phase 1.
And also too, George, you said over a 2-year period. In this mitigation letter, it says a 3-year period of checking and staff, borough staff are being involved. We gotta assure that that's gonna happen too, that when you go out there to check, that somebody from the town is involved with this, so they know what's going on.
Yeah, so I guess Jim is right. See this happen the right way. But here's our client. He can assure you, hopefully, that he will abide with whatever the wishes of the commission, reasonable wishes of the commission is right.
I mean, it's in this.
It is in
What you gave
this.
us, it is in
It
this.
is also, we talked about the turtles too.
Right, but, you know, I think Jim is concerned because, and I've been on this mission for a while, we've had this in other projects, and I know Jim has never heard anything. And this is a pretty big project over a span of a few years. I think we should be.
Well, I understand that Bart's going to talk about phases, so maybe you have sort of a beginning of a phase and an end of a phase, touches, and then beginning of the next phase, a touch. This stuff will be done with phase one. Wherever the phase one is, I don't know exactly, I expect it's somewhere. And also the box turtle situation, that will have to be phase one, and then we'll have the next phase of the next phase. So anything reasonable you want to put in your conditions, we can talk about it. Tim is here. He can advise us what's legally okay and what isn't.
I got a question.
Obviously, if we don't do it, what's called on a notice, we could be in violation of our permit.
Go ahead.
Is it possible as part of the condition, even though once they're assuming there's an approval, that's what we're working towards, that a bi-monthly update could be required where it doesn't fall on staff, the project manager needs to come in and say, this is what's going on, and make a presentation at the end of each meeting? Is that possible? That would be kind of take the pressure off everybody.
You can certainly do that, right? There'll be a lot of different approaches to that in terms of requiring periodic, maybe even, if not quarterly, or 3 months or so, 2 or 3 months during construction, to provide this report that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And if there are any red flags on that report, the commission's review of that report can require attendance at the next meeting to explain yourself better.
Something to that effect.
Anybody else have anything?
If I can just add my 2 cents to move on, what George was talking about, the report for DEP is not really a report so much as is a providing documentation that they didn't find what they said they found out there. That's all he's submitting with that report, is just additional documentation supporting that. And we feel, from the standpoint of this commission, the fact that we don't have endangered species, or at least we haven't encountered endangered species, should be enough. George has indicated he's more than happy to provide the report for technical information, but basically all he's submitting, and the reason he's submitting this is because it's all part of the process we need to submit for DOT or DEP for our stormwater management permit that we need to submit because we're over 5 acres in size. So we've got to submit the DEP as part of our permitting process. And as part of that permitting project, they require this national database letter and a response from a soil scientist. So that's why we're doing all this work, is so that we submit to the state, we've got everything in line, and then they will look at the stormwater management plan in its entirety with the whole site. So that's why this is happening. We're not doing this per se to provide the commission with extra documentation, although we're happy to provide it. But for all practical purposes, the state is just looking for documentation on what we found, so they have a complete record. And they take all these records and line them up and put them into their room and make the next idiot who has an application have to suffer it over, we have to suffer through 18 potential fines. So that's why we're doing things. Personally, and I think Joe would agree, we got no problem in reporting, providing a monthly letter or monthly report to staff. Jim's concerned about not being done. We can always work out some kind of bond arrangement where there's a total bond for a phase, and if reports aren't in hand, that bond does not come back. So it behooves the applicant to submit the letter so we can get a credit and he can have his bond reduced as he goes through the project. So there are ways we can make sure. But as part of the deep's requirements, especially amphibian, George talked about having REMA on site, but it also talks about educating the on-staff personnel, so the on-staff personnel know what's going on. So at least the project manager has some experience what's being found in the field, and he's just not gonna say, just a stupid little snapper. You know, he's gonna have some experience to know what's going on back out there. So
that's what we did in Glastonbury in a couple of, basically we met at the construction meeting, and all the players that were going to be involved in during the entire construction were there. We did our initial surveys, and we did some education. We even gave them information and said, you see this, and 2 turtles actually, we weren't there to find them, they found them. And I got the call, and I got the pictures, and like, stop, we're coming. And then we have to report them to the D. The other thing too, that I think Bart might tell you is that this size project requires documentation for erosion sedimentation control to the D. So we have to, and I forget when we have to do it, if it's every storm that has a runoff, it's over something or something. Right, and so the report has to be put together that says I've inspected, and it's usually an engineer. Inspected, basically it's a sign off, and that goes into the file. DP has an occasion, shows up and asks for the file. But then people celebrated cases where they didn't do it and they were fined. One of them was my client. So.
All right, so unless we have any more questions.
Well, before you start this,
Sure.
What you were saying, Bart, about, monthly reports and bond and everything like this, that all sounds nice, but if we give you approval tonight, we don't have that in our documents, it doesn't mean anything.
Well, I can work with staff, and we can work out what we're gonna report and what the frequency we're gonna report. So if we're gonna do sedimentation erosion, I know it's not Jim's domain, but I know there are other people in town hall responsible for that. We could deal with encountered endangered species, reporting all the other activity that takes place. So just basically giving you a little diary of what's happened on site.
Right.
What about your phasing?
Well, I won't talk about that.
We're not ready for an approval just yet. So, just get that.
So I put this together, quite frankly, right after a meeting. My clients are kind of studying a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about this. It's more of a narrative form than a plan form, because if you look at phase 1, there's a lot of activities that take place as part of phase 1. And we're going to be all over the place trying to get this done. So let me go through what I can see as phase 1. And the intent here is to kind of give you a listing what needs to be done as part of this first phase, so that we can at least get the first group of units in, and then we can start moving on to the subsequent phases. Generally, most of the work is either dictated by roadway or detention basins. So for the first section, we've included the construction of these units here, these units, and this cluster of units around the outside, which would give approximately 23 units. It would also include the construction of the roadway up to a certain station, and I'm calling this station 1500, and then approximately 500 feet along this road. These 2 detention basins, and of course, to make those units work, we've got to include the infrastructure for water, for sanitary sewer. I included this bridge going through here because, quite frankly, if you were gonna be putting a sanitary sewer in, you're gonna be working in that area, you might as well do all the work and complete that work at the same time. We've included the parking up here at the head of the trail system. And also we've included the invasive plant removal as part of the first phase. We see this as probably about a 3 to 4 to 5 year project. So as George explained, it's a 3-year program for the invasive species removal. So we're not gonna be out of here until after the invasive species has happened. So this commission's got plenty of opportunity as we move down this list to look at this and say, hey, you haven't done this yet. Why don't you work on this before we let you do this? All right, so that's what I've tried to do. And basically all this area deals with these 2 detention areas. All that stormwater is gonna go into this detention area or this detention area here. So we're not trying to expand these units out, or we're not proposing to construct the 2 of the detention areas. In phase 2, we're showing the completion of this roadway here, the installation of that detention area. Number 3, the construction of the shed, the community garden down here. Put trailer parking, but that was a mistake. That's a duplicate that shouldn't have been here. And it's also part of phase 2. We're gonna go back to phase 1 and we're gonna start to remove a lot of sedimentation and erosion control measures, especially those areas that we showed. Because we're dealing with a lot of amphibians potentially, we wanna remove the barriers on the ground so that once that area is stabilized, those amphibians are gonna be able to move and they're not gonna permanently have siltation fence and other measures around there. And then it's phase 3. We're talking about extending this road up in this location and this road out approximately 500 feet. Out in this location, the construction of this detention area, so that all these units can work within that detention area. And then phase 4 would be the remainder of this area. This detention area will already be installed, but we include this area. Now, the problem with trying to come up with a comprehensive multi-year plan telling you how many units are gonna be constructed or when they're gonna be constructed is we don't really know what the market conditions are gonna be like in 3 to 4 years. So instead of saying, okay, we're gonna build 3 units here and 2 units here, and then 3 units here and 2 units here, we've tried to group these things in phases. I think Joe will agree when we talked before, he was talking about building 10 to 12 units per phase. So for example, in phase 1, we're probably actually gonna get 2 phases constructed. But to do the 2 phases, we still have to do all the infrastructure work to get it done. So that's not a problem the way I see these units. Like phase 3, we've got 30 units. That's basically 3 groups of 10 buildings that take place. The problem is gonna be if the market is such that the single family homes, there's more of a demand than the multifamily units, then we have to rethink our thinking. And what I'm suggesting is if the commission accepts this face value of what it is, knowing that if we make any substantial changes to our phasing plan, which is going to be plainly obvious because we're going to need to get building permits, and if building permits aren't done within the phasing, it's going to be a red flag. Then we would come back to this commission and ask for a modified phasing plan and explain why we need the phasing plan. And for example, if we start building more units in this location, we'd immediately have to start building that detention basin over there. And we would include that within our modified plan. But for us to come before you in right now in 5 years and predict what the last unit's gonna be, it's kind of an impossible task, and it's just wishful thinking, and we're kind of fooling ourselves and fooling this commission. We'd rather be more forthright with giving you a phasing plan like this, with the notification or the justification that we will come before the commission at a future time.
So question will be in phase 1,
Yes.
what percentage of this project would you be opening up the land?
I would
30%?
say we're
40%?
probably 35% of the overall site. Again, the justification is we need to bring the utilities in. Even though we're bringing utilities here, there's a main that's got to be run along the back of the building here.
I think you're gonna have to work with that, because I think what will happen is you do start jumping around because of market pressures, then you open up the whole site that defeats the whole phasing thing. So You really gotta commit to, you gotta do this phase, you gotta sell some of these units, and then you can.
Oh, we intend to sell the units, it's not like
You're not gonna be able to jump it.
this is a pie in the sky, but we've gotta do certain things, we've gotta bring the sewer into the site, and we gotta bring water into the site, and we gotta build the stormwater systems. That's the largest nut to crack, and the road crossing, that's the largest nut to crack as part of the first
That's
phase,
still in the 35% area.
because of all this other activity.
You know, what I'm saying is when you start jumping up into these other phases, because of market pressures, I don't think we're interested in seeing this whole project being.
Well, we're not, because the plan is, if you know, we're looking to start buttoning up these first phase, for example, so that when we open up the second phase, we've got this buttoned up. We're not looking to open up the entire site eventually. We're looking to complete these. Once people start living in these units, they're not gonna wanna see piles of topsoil and silt fence around the houses. We're gonna work it in such a way that these houses will be finished, the lawns will be sloped, the slopes will be maintained, everything will be finished. And it's just a matter of building the houses and a little bit of road. So the big nut is in here. We can sharpen our pencil a little bit and say, okay, as we complete this, we will immediately stabilize those areas. But that's really the intent. We're not looking to keep this whole site wide open. We're looking to kind of do stuff, button it up, close it down, and move on with those units, and then look at what's going on, and then moving our project forward.
That's something you could work out with the town agent.
We'd be more than happy if you wanted to.
As my father always told me, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think what we really need to be able to digest this phasing properly is somehow to have it be depicted on the plan, get a better understanding, and then we can think about how we may be able to work allowing a change down the road.
Sounds fair to me.
I've got no problem putting the major lines, but when we start talking about the services through here, you're gonna have long, skinny.
Yeah, even if we done a color code.
Okay.
It's-
I just don't want
it's
confusion,
hard to
we're confused
envision.
now because.
No, but and I think what Dave was getting at is that you're putting in the sewer line, and behind those first set of houses.
Right.
Well, you're gonna just be disturbing all that, and you're only gonna put in, what, 4 units on the first phase?
Then we got 23
Well, I mean, on the lower section.
on the lower,
Yeah.
we're up to here, so
Right.
there'd be a bunch of units. that
Right,
are the
but you're gonna be
sewers.
disturbing everything behind that.
Just where the sewers. I understand what you're saying, I don't wanna make it sound like we're ripping up the entire.
Right, well, well, you're saying that, but believe me, we know what's happened in other projects, before. So we gotta be assured that, and I understand what you're saying about market, but we gotta be assured that you're gonna only do what you say, and no more.
We're gonna do what's here unless the commission tells us it's okay to do otherwise. We're not making the assumption that we can make a change. We're telling you that if we make a change, we're gonna come back before this commission and say, this is what we would like to do, is it okay with you?
Okay, and again, like I said a few minutes ago, would like to see that in writing.
Do the color coded thing to the
Yeah.
next.
I'd be more than happy to color it up.
I mean, it's just because unfortunately, this commission has been involved with other things.
I understand that, but we also have a developer here who's got a track record through the town of Berlin of doing the right thing at
Right.
the right time, so.
But again, it's nice to have it in writing, so we know
Yes.
it's there.
We will work on with staff on the phasing plan and coming up with a reporting form or something that we will delineate exactly what we'll report to the commission.
Fair enough.
Okay. I should point out, we got Jen and we do have Scott here
Scott.
too, so if you have any questions for them, they are sitting here quietly waiting for questions, so.
I have, got anybody else?
We all have some.
Yeah. Does anybody has any other questions for
We have a couple of recording properties.
Can I just introduce myself? My name is Anthony Manzi, 192 Harvestville Road. I'm the last house on Harvestville, unfortunately. And my concerns are, we've had a tremendous lot of water problems down at that area. And we got 24-inch pipe coming down my back property. Takes water from Round Hill Road, and there's a pond, I guess, inch off the Shuttle Meadow that drains into that.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I know that the catch basin geodrains were put in at the time the subdivision was developed, probably in anticipation that road was gonna go through. That's why they left a strip of property that connected back to that area. All I can say is our work to connect the sewer, and that's all we're doing is connecting the sewer. Will not exacerbate or add any impervious area within the site. We're gonna go in there, do the work, close it back in, restore it to original conditions. We flag up those pipes so that we're not touching those pipes in the drainage system through there, and it's not our intent to change the drainage pattern at all through there.
That's my concern. What's coming down, I own the back property there, where that's going into, going on to Shuttle Meadow.
Right.
There's a 24-inch pipe.
Right. Yeah, we're not,
That's going into the wetland.
we're not looking to change any of those drainage
I
patterns.
know, but are you gonna be, not knowing, are you gonna be cutting through
We're bringing a
that property?
We're bringing a force main
Through your
along the
property.
edge of the wetland to the manhole that sits there at the end of Harvest Hill. Then I guess that's the property you maintain with the lawn, it's got
I
a
do,
fence
yes,
around it.
yeah, I
We're
do.
gonna connect into that manhole and make a connection to it.
That's what I'm afraid of.
But I think, Bart, we're talking two different watersheds. The Manzi's property
Above
receives
it
runoff
is
from
coming,
totally different
this is the
watersheds.
stuff at the bottom of the hill where the drainage was installed as part of the old subdivision and ran through.
Right, well, that water, the major part of that work comes up around Hill Road. And when it rains, it'll actually go over the top of that 24-inch pipe, over the top, onto my property, down to that drain that you're talking about. That drain is an 8-inch pipe. That can't take any more water, trust me. I've been there more.
I
I've been there
understand,
long
I
enough.
understand how those pipes were sized a long time ago too, and not anticipating it, Round Hill was gonna develop, you know, was whatever.
I know, but now you're there and you got
If it's
new
okay with-
versus old.
If it's okay with staff and the commission, I'll look at that area for the drainage and see if I can work some drainage through there.
I need some kind of help because that particular drainage goes backs up into my house. I got some
The key is to direct it
generators
from the
and-
hill down through the wetlands and not have it sitting at the.
If that would, you gotta see it, gentlemen, you have to see it to understand it. I mean, it all looks good on paper, but when the water runs, it's devastating, honestly. I can show you pictures.
Well, Barry, if you can look into this
I will
and
look
see,
into
and
it.
see if you can come up with a solution or.
I'll see if we can direct the water through. The same thing, we had another homeowner out there in Glendale had an issue, Jim and I went out there and looked at it, so.
Yeah, I mean, again, where that pipe, that drain, storm sewer is,
Yeah.
goes down and back of Glenview.
Yeah.
Goes into a 36-inch pipe.
Right.
You're familiar with that?
Yes, I am. I just never seen it when it rains.
I'm sorry?
I've seen the area, I'm familiar with the area, I just never seen it when it rains.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, that area is flood.
Well,
It's
maybe with it, well, I can't do it next week, but the week after, maybe I can get a hold of you, and meet
Please
you
do.
out at the site and see if Jim's available.
Please do invite all of you down here, please, come and take a look. That's all I want is protection from the water. And I've been battling it for years. My parents originally there, and it's been a fiasco, honestly.
If there's a simple solution, we'll figure it out.
That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking, so.
Well,
That's my tale of woe. That's why I'm here.
Between Bart and Jim, maybe we can
Yeah.
figure something out. If something we can do, great, but Bart will be able to tell us.
Because we're gonna work in that area for the pipe, so it's a matter of just regrading it, we might as well regrade it the way it works.
You mentioned the sanitary sewer.
Yep.
Where is that going to go?
That's gonna connect back off of Harvest Hill, and now it goes down Harvest Hill, there's a manhole that's left on the other side of the fence. We're gonna connect into that manhole through that strip and make the connection so it runs up into the back of the tractor. So the 2-inch polypropylene force main,
How much protection do I have if that thing should want to back up or whatever?
that won't back up.
Where do you live?
I'll give you my address. It will not back
I know
up.
where he lives.
It will not back
I'm
up.
serious, I mean, just honest questions.
It's coming, the force main is coming from a grinder pump. So we're not having an infinite amount of water coming through that area. So the grinder pump will control the flow.
So that's gonna go up to that first manhole,
And then go grab it.
and then which way it's gonna go
It's gonna go down Harvest Hill.
down? You're aware of, there's sanitary sewers coming down
Yep,
from Round Hill
we're
Road.
working with the fire district. They would like us to retain our flows during the off-peak hours so we don't overcharge the downstream system. And we're working with the fire district.
And I have, on that property, wetlands, and I have water that runs right onto Harvest Hill Road, down to that drain that we were talking about. So it's more water, there's a lot of water
I
down
hope it's
there.
not going into the sanitary.
Say again?
I hope it's not going into the sanitary manhole. Because the fire district could be interested in hearing that.
No, these are storm drains, if you would please. But that's my tale of woe, so.
Okay, we'll go out
If
there.
anybody can, I'd appreciate if, like I said, you guys wanna come down? Well, I took pictures, if you wanna see pictures of what it
But
looks
between
like.
Bart and Jim, I think they'll take a look at it.
I just wanna make it available to anybody that wants to look at it, please do.
If you have the pictures available, we made sure out of the site, that would be helpful.
No problem. Okay.
Thank you.
Very much, appreciate it.
Anybody else have anything?
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I would recommend the commission continue the hearing until the December meeting, give us time to work on the phasing plan, and some of the reporting requirements, so that everything is there up front. Everyone
Yep.
agrees to what we're gonna do and how we're gonna do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Down the road.
I don't know what you guys think, if that's,
Absolutely.
so.
And we would agree to any extension necessary to get to the next meeting. Keep the public hearing.
Yeah, so can I have a motion to continue the public hearing till December 5th, 6th?
Commissioner Rogan will make a motion to
Yeah.
continue the public hearing on application 21-09 until December.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
If the commission has no questions for these two, is it all right to release them for the next meeting, or do you think we're going to have more? Okay, that's fine.
I think we're in the process of work.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Just thought I'd ask.
Well, thank you guys for.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And no problem. You'll hear from me next week or the week after. I'm gonna be out of town.
You want to close?
I'll be out of town next week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank weekend of
I
Thanksgiving.
want to see.
Wait,
Oh,
I'm gonna give you my number.
I can, I'll get you. I get you.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night, guys.
Good night.
Jen, Scott, you guys hanging out?
Bye, guys.
Jen and Scott are gonna stay in case I might need them.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Next is, we're gonna open public hearing for application 21-11W, proposed by Kevin Bundy to construct a distribution warehouse and associated improvements within both the regulated wetlands and upland review area on lot 9A, block 154, number 131, New Park Drive. Can I have a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion to open public hearing 21-11W.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, staff. For the record, my name is Alan Bongiovanni. I'm a licensed land surveyor in the state of Connecticut with an office located at 170 Payne Road in Newington. The application before you is on behalf of Kevin Bundy and Bundy Hope Overhaul and Repair at 131 New Park Drive. They are the purchasers of what was the former driving range. It's 11.4 acres in the BT1 zone, bounded on the west by the Berlin Turnpike on the south by land of the town of Berlin between New Park Drive and the subject property, and the Bundy property at 131 New Park Drive, and then there's a gas station and a couple of uses to the north. What the applicant is requesting is to construct a building for their shipping and receiving that takes place on the existing property to the east. They have an existing parking lot in this area. They're proposing to put a driveway through and just access to this building parking area so that they can get trucks in and out of that area. This site does not require additional parking for this use, as there's more than enough parking on the neighboring parcel. But they're proposing to construct an 8,000 square foot building, and unfortunately, part of it's in the wetlands. We have an area of this size of 3,830 square feet that are actually in the wetland area to accommodate our parking or our access to the building. As I'm sure all the commissioners are aware, this is a driving range, was a golf driving range. It's an open lawn area. It technically has wetland soils on it, and I have Jen Benno and Scott Stevens here who worked on the property with us. But we feel this is a reasonable request because it's not a high value or significant pristine area that we're looking to disturb. This is a disturbed area. I think if you excavated in this area, you'd probably find some sort of under drain system because the wetland corridor goes from the northeast to the southwest. And if you look at that under most conditions, it's a grass field. There was a driving range. It doesn't really pond water. There is a swale through this area that the water does travel as it during different storm events, but it's a disturbed soil. It doesn't have the vegetation that's usually wetlands support, and we feel this is a reasonable request to do this. In making this request to impact 3,800 square feet of area, we're proposing to mitigate that with 4,800 square feet of wetland creation. The wetland creation was determined based on a lot of factors, but one of the things we didn't want to do is a lot of this area we have no intention to disturb at this time, and there's a swale through this area. And if we kind of worked anywhere over in this area here with a mitigation, we might encourage too much erosion and sediment in that area. So we selected an area that's adjacent to the wetlands, bringing it down to an elevation that it will become a wetland. These soils that were removed from this area of wetlands would be put along the bottom so that we're starting with the proper soil types. We're going to plant it with sedges and seed mixes so that it will become a viable wetland for habitat, nutrient removal, and then light. This is really a simple application. It's not that complicated. Again, it's to accommodate a building for the neighboring business. The access was determined and the location because it's the most probable location for the business next door. If we were to bring that farther out, the amount of fill that would be required and the earthwork would be required would be that much more. The Bundys do have a plan or a contemplated plan for putting another building on the site, another manufacturing facility at some point. I'd like to tell you that in the near future, but I don't know their timing. We're going to come back with another application for a primary building on this site, but that is something that depends on market conditions and things like that. Again, this is a basic application. We've designed the grading so that it's minimal impact. We have a water quality stormwater basin to the rear of the building so that all of our runoff will come around the building from the pavement and into this area and then leak off after being treated into the natural swale and then traveling south.
What's the elevation of the building compared to the rest of it?
So the building is 156, the elevation of the finished floor. The ground is 154 in this area, 153, so we're only picking it up a few feet.
Yeah. But I'm saying that, like, again, hitting Baldwin many times, that seems to be a higher, probably the highest
It is, the grade, the highest point of the site is on the northeast, and it slopes down to this location, it drops, and then it rises again in this location, so it's gonna be, we can't bring it up to the elevation of the existing parking to the east, just because the amount of fill that would be required to stick out of the ground like a sore thumb.
Unrelated to the wetlands, is the Algonquin pipeline running anywhere near there?
So that's one of the determining factors as to where we placed our mitigation. The Algonquin gas line runs through this area here. So we had to make sure that we were well enough away from that we didn't disturb any of that area around it or within the easement. And yes, it does traverse the property.
I thought it did, but I wasn't really sure if it was what side it was on.
A couple of quick things. Because we have an area, we wanted to make sure we weren't getting into issues with the federal government and federal wetlands. Jen and Scott have identified an area very small in this location that are federal wetlands. They meet the hydrology and the vegetation as well as soil types, but the remainder of the site is not of federal quality. So if this commission is so gracious as to approve this, it wouldn't be required to go to the federal government.
What type of truck trailers gonna be coming in and out of it?
Just box trucks. Yep, smaller box trucks, 30, 40-foot trucks. The only utility service here is gonna be electric. There's not even gonna be plumbing in this building.
Oh, there's not?
No.
We're just not gonna have heat then, or are we gonna have?
Oh, it'll have heat and air conditioning
But I'm
and
saying
electrical, but it's not gonna have plumbing, bathroom facilities, no.
Natural gas coming in there?
No, I think they're gonna do I believe they're going to do with electric.
Okay.
I could be mistaken on that, but that is my belief.
Everything gonna be overhead then?
No, there's a transformer here. I'm gonna assume that it's gonna go right in the upland from the transformer located in this spot here, right to the building.
So they're gonna have to disturb a little bit of disturbance in the upland.
It's gonna be in the upland, even outside of the regulated area.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for our guests? Jim, anything?
Yeah, one question for Jen. In terms of the wetlands mitigation as it's proposed, what time of the year do you feel would be the best time to attack and try to complete that aspect of the project?
Well, not during the winter. Obviously, for the planting purposes, we'd want to get that done like May, June, or you'd have to wait till like the early fall in order to do the plantings, really. I mean, you could establish a pretty good seed base in there, like a kind of like an annual rye or something, if just to prevent erosion until the other seed mixes can become established. Unless you're required to use plugs, then that's different. Because it depends really what the hydrology is when they get down in there and do the mitigation area.
And what's your thought in terms of a time frame of monitoring that area to ensure that it takes properly?
That's a good question. And I found that it varies town by town. It really depends on the kind of habitat you're trying to establish. If you're just trying to establish like a palustrine emergent or like a shallow marsh area and like a shrub swamp area, that's much easier to do than say like a forested area. So in this case, we're probably leaning more towards like the shallow marsh and the shrub swamp. So probably you could get away with 3 years of monitoring on that, unless there are issues, and then the town probably could have the ability to extend the monitoring time until those issues are resolved. I know I've run into that on another town. They had actually 5 years because it was part of an Army Corps project. And after the 5 years, there were still invasive species problems. So the town has extended their requirements for mitigation monitoring. So I would say probably if you're going to do emergent shrub swamp, 3 years would probably be sufficient.
And probably an on-site inspection twice a year?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing more now. We'll see it early in the growing season, like late May, early June, just to make sure everything survived the winter. And then again, during the fall, before the end of the growing season, just to make sure everything survived.
Okay, and a quick question for Alan. In terms of the construction sequencing or timeframes, obviously there's still a site plan approval involved here.
Site plan approval, we're going next week for that. Because this is an as of right, we would expect approval at that meeting. The building's on its way. They would like to be able to put the foundation in before the frost comes. And I agree with Jen, I think this is probably, spring to summer of this excavation, and if it's too dry, we wait until the fall to do the actual planting for the wetland mitigation. But I think this could be properly done. We've got a very detailed E&S plan, protecting the areas. That could be done, in the fall, winter, late fall, winter months.
I guess what I'm getting at, would you feel comfortable, and obviously, perhaps you can't speak for your client, that if there was a condition placed upon an action by the board, that the wetland mitigation, the initial activity in construction phase of the mitigation be completed prior to a certificate of occupancy on the structure? Do you think timing wise that is?
I think this can be built in relatively short time frame. The actual completion of this might not actually happen until next fall, so I think that would be tough. They would bond for it.
Okay.
I mean,
that's my next question.
They would bond for it.
Because what are you putting, like a Butler building kind of thing?
It's a metal building, right?
Yeah, so it's gonna be prefab and everything else?
Yeah. This would go up relatively quick, and they really need it for their business operations. Contracts come and go, and they have a contract now where this is of a real concern. Again, they'd be happy to bond with it. As Jen said, if it's 3 years of monitoring, we're all on board with that, and that's just really the standard procedure. You want to be able to protect those areas and make sure that they do what they're supposed to do.
No, so all the material you're gonna take out of there, you're gonna use for the mitigation, what are you gonna do with that? Are you gonna
So
stockpile
some of
it?
that area will be stockpiled in this area for our grading. We do have some material that we do have to move around here. Excess material would probably be removed from site.
Right. Anybody else have any questions? Is anybody, I don't see anybody in the audience. Jim, what do you think about,
I'm comfortable with this. I think if we talk about the mitigation, looking at a 3-year monitoring period, say spring and the fall
Sure.
reporting. We make the condition that the mitigation be completed prior to the certificate of occupancy being granted. If it cannot be completed, then I can work with the applicant's professionals to establish the proper bonding value, and we'll go from there.
now is this something you want in writing from them?
I think we can work with that.
Okay,
But we would make it a condition of the approval.
right.
So it's not like we're telling them what they have to do.
right,
Yeah.
right. So, I don't wanna put you on the spot right now, but you're looking for an approval from us tonight.
We are. We're
Because you
trying
want-
to get in the month earlier's meeting, and it just scheduling didn't work that way.
And Jim, you're comfortable. Anybody have any questions?
No.
All right, so I need a motion to close the public hearing.
Close the public hearing? A second.
All in favor? Now I need a motion, well, you're not done yet. I need a motion if you want to approve or deny the application.
I want to approve the application 21-11W.
Can I have a second?
Second, if that's with conditions.
Right, with our standard conditions along with a 3-year monitoring a monitoring program to ensure that the wetland mitigation is completed in accordance with the plan. The commission would receive progress reports on the mitigation establishment in the spring and fall of each year. If at some point in time, when we reach that 3-year period, if we don't feel that the mitigation has been properly established, we can go on, say, a 6-month continuation, 6 months at a time.
And then if the building is not completed, the building is completed before the mitigation, you'll sit down with staff and put a bond so that it's done?
Correct. We'll establish a proper value to ensure its completion.
Okay, so as the conditions have just been stated, we can finish this.
Yeah.
Correct. All right, so I second.
Second, all in favor?
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you. Now for the other business, application 06-4TWF, proposal by Pistol Creek Associates LLC, care of Crane Development to construct utilities, roadways, and discharge drainage into a wetland and flood hazard zone on lots 35 and 40, block 142, lots 4 and 5, block 155, lots 1, 1A, 1B, block 156, north and south of Spruce Brook Road. Current modifications, they're looking for a 1-year extension. I think they came to us a year or so ago for that.
Actually, I think the commission granted a 2-year extension.
Yes,
last
so-
time. And there is a piece of correspondence in front of you this evening, folks, with, from the applicant, actually from the applicant's engineer, representing Rio Vista / Crystal Creek, requesting a 1-year extension of the commencement period for construction, as was approved actually back in 2006.
How many extensions can they get?
We are at a point where there are still several years left in the overall period. So,
But they're looking for a it's not a
1-year
1-year extension, okay. Last time we gave them 2-year, I think, if you remember.
Did they say why?
there's a number of reasons. There are some court challenges right now to the property. The developer is trying to keep his existing permits active, and the outcome of those deliberations.
So, anybody has another question for Jim or anything like this? Otherwise,
And there was no reason from the staff standpoint to deny this.
because it's been approved for, so many years now, so.
Technically, we're still within the time frame.
So can I have a motion to approve?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve a extension for a year for application 06-14W.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Other than that, I don't think we have correspondence. Jim, I know that,
We don't have anything technically in writing, but during as a part of the last meeting with the commission, you recall that the property owner, I believe it's at 155 Tollgate Road, was required to furnish the commission with a copy of the as-built drawing for a certification that the work that he proposed as mitigation for his encroachments was constructed properly. I spoke to the property owner soon after our last meeting, advised him that the commission was looking for something along those lines for this evening. Not heard a word from him since then. At this point, what I would recommend is the commission request staff to contact the town attorney to see what would be the next steps to take to ensure that the work was performed.
I mean, it looks nice. If you drive by, it looks nice. I mean, grass is coming up. It looks really nice, but we haven't gotten any information from it.
Make sure that
Right, exactly. How do you guys feel about this? Do you think we should
that's the way to go.
proceed with the town attorney?
Sure.
If so, can I have a motion to instruct Jim to contact the town attorney about the 155 Tollgate Road?
Commissioner Rogan will make a motion for the town's attorney to contact.
Can I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Anything else, Jim? Oh, the only thing is that, and I just noticed this mitigation, preserve and shutter metal, it says Meadow Lane.
Oh, that's a really.
It's like, go into Meadow Lane, they're gonna have a lot
That's a
of.
big project, out there.
Yeah, right. I don't know if that's any big deal, but, so, otherwise, if, that's it?
I have nothing else.
Okay, can I motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Can I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Rogan.
1, 2.
Okay, motion, Bonnie.
Thanks, Steve.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank
Thanks for hanging in, hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Just hang,
I didn't mean to
Hey,
beat
just-
them up,
no.
you know, it's-
just a minute,
But you,
just, what's the time? 8:15.
8:15.
16.